Now, because you admit to being intimate with both men during the same 2-day period, idea who fathered your 11-month-old son, Homo, has already done this once before. You're hoping this baby is yours. Indeed, the child's biological father, you want full custody.
Your Honor, I was young. I was going through some difficulty, giving me more attention than my husband was. His friends was more important at the time, and he just wanted to run around and not be a family man. He had left me and the kids in the house, Your Honor, and went outside with his friends and just left us.
About your wife's affair?
No, Your Honor, I did not know about the affair.
Kind of broke up for a minute, took a break, and got back together?
Yes, Your Honor.
But you had no idea?
No, Your Honor, she told me she was being completely faithful.
This case opens inside Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, where the quiet tension is so real it feels like part of the evidence. 3 adults arrive carrying the weight of 11 months of doubt, guilt, anger, and hope, each one believing they deserve clarity, and each one fearing what clarity might cost. What unfolds is not just a paternity debate. It is a study of how relationships collapse under secrecy, how regret forms when silence stretches too long, and how a single DNA test becomes the most powerful testimony anyone could offer. The court, normally a place of legal order, shifts into an emotional stage where the law meets human frailty. The first person present is Ms. Shomo, a woman who steps forward knowing she has to admit choices she once tried to bury. She carries the pain of a marriage wounded long before anyone spoke the truth aloud. Her appearance in court signals a personal surrender. She cannot continue living under the weight of uncertainty about her child's biological father. She arrives prepared to explain how the need for affection, combined with old emotional wounds, pushed her into a weekend relationship outside her marriage. Instead of hiding behind excuses, she presents it plainly. In this courtroom, her honesty becomes its own kind of evidence. Beside her sits Mr. Kleckler, her legal husband. He carries mistrust built slowly over years of suspicion and reconciliation. He arrives with the mindset of a man torn between loyalty and self-protection. He has raised several children with his wife, and he wants to believe in the stability of his family. However, he also knows the human mind rarely erases doubts completely. It simply hides them until they resurface. The relationship between marriage, betrayal, and responsibility becomes central to his testimony. He explains how he once tried to rebuild trust again and again, and how betrayal in earlier years created cracks that never fully disappeared. Completing the triangle is Mr. Freeman, the co-worker involved in the brief relationship with Ms. Shomo. He arrives with a surprising calmness, ready to claim responsibility if the truth leads in his direction. In fact, he openly states he wants full custody if he is determined to be the biological father. This unusual level of confidence adds pressure to the situation. It shows that he does not fear the results. He fears missing the chance to be a father if the child is his. His presence also demonstrates how relationships outside a marriage can carry emotional consequences far beyond the moment they occurred. Judge Lauren Lake does not treat this case as mere entertainment or emotional chaos. She handles it like a multi-layered legal inquiry where truth matters more than comfort. She continuously reminds each participant that honesty, clarity, and responsibility form the foundation of the relationship between law and justice, a phrase that echoes repeatedly in her courtroom because it represents the core principle of every paternity hearing. Her tone balances empathy with authority. She does not shame the mother for her mistakes, nor does she allow the men to hide behind selective memory. Instead, she focuses on the child, the only innocent person involved, and on the legal need to determine the truth. Around them, the courtroom becomes an analytical environment. Each testimony feels like part of a documentary rather than a dramatic scene. No exaggeration, no fictional dialogue, only the clear movement of facts and emotions toward resolution. The case also reflects real-world issues people often hear about through the Truth Changes Everything podcast, the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, and the Divorce Course podcast, where paternity cases, family law disputes, and the emotional aftermath of betrayal are frequently examined through legal and psychological lenses. Those discussions explore how people regret the moment they decided to take a DNA test, not because the truth is wrong, but because knowing the truth forces them to confront who they were when they made their choices. In this court, regret takes many forms. Ms. Shoma regrets the choices that created confusion. Mr. Kleckler regrets not listening to his instincts sooner. Mr. Freeman regrets the broken dynamic that surrounds the child who might be his. All of these emotional elements surface quietly, without theatrics, in the way each person answers Judge Lake's direct questions. Judge Lauren Lake asks each party to explain why they are here and why they believe a DNA test is necessary. The mother speaks first, admitting that her marriage had been struggling for years. She felt unappreciated and emotionally disconnected. While this does not justify her actions, it helps explain how vulnerability turned into decisions she wishes she could undo. Her testimony echoes common themes heard in DNA test cheating stories, emphasizing how emotional needs, when ignored, can lead people toward temporary comfort that later becomes long-term pain. Mr. Kleckler openly shares how he had seen signs that made him question the baby's paternity, changes in appearance, comments from people around him, and moments when his instincts told him something was off. Yet, each time he attempted to speak up, guilt and the fear of being wrong forced him to remain silent. His internal conflict reflects a pattern familiar in many evidence-stage and divorce case situations, where doubt becomes a silent participant in the relationship, shaping decisions in ways neither partner fully understands. He hoped to restore his marriage, but the unresolved questions kept creating distance between him and his wife. Mr. Freeman explains his side in straightforward terms. He does not deny his involvement with the mother and does not shy away from the possibility of being the biological father. His willingness to assume custody, should the test confirm it, adds a layer of seriousness to his position. He presents himself as accountable, contrasting with the chaotic emotions between the married couple. His testimony resembles many real stories in adoption stories, full episodes, and family law discussions, where unexpected paternity links open entirely new paths for children and adults alike. Throughout this portion of the hearing, Judge Lauren Lake acts like both a legal guide and a philosophical anchor. She repeatedly emphasizes the concept of justice in jurisprudence, reminding the parties that truth is not simply about biology. It is about ensuring that a child grows up with honesty at the foundation of their family structure. Justice, in her courtroom, is not punishment, it is clarity. As Judge Lake reviews the history between the parties, she also acknowledges the emotional residue from the couple's past. The mother's voice breaks when she recalls how betrayal years ago created wounds she never healed. She reminds the court that her actions were not intended to cause permanent damage, but were reactions born from hurt. The husband acknowledges that his past behavior contributed to the breakdown of trust. These confessions, while not excuses, reveal how relationships deteriorate slowly, often long before a DNA test becomes necessary. The court also discusses broader legal elements, including topics often associated with higher legal bodies like the Supreme Court child support debates, where paternity certainty plays a major role. In a similar way, this hearing prepares for the legal implications depending on the outcome of the test. Regardless of who the father is, The court must ensure the child receives emotional and financial support. Next, Judge Lake turns to the emotional implications. She asks each party what they hope to gain from the results. The mother hopes for relief. She wants her child to grow up with the truth and not be caught in the conflicts she experienced in her own life. The husband hopes for closure. He believes knowing the truth will help him decide how to move forward emotionally and financially. The coworker hopes for confirmation, believing he can provide the child with a stable future. Throughout this first portion of the description, the courtroom feels like a place where emotional tension rises without any need for dramatic scenes. The truth moves naturally toward its endpoint. Each person explains their past actions as if offering testimony to themselves more than to the judge. And through all of this, Judge Lauren Lake remains steady, ensuring that fairness governs the process. By the end of this first segment, the court is prepared for the DNA results. The atmosphere becomes heavier but not chaotic. Everyone knows that the next steps will determine the child's legal identity, the future of the marriage, the direction of custody discussions, and the emotional recovery of everyone involved. Just before the results are read, the judge reminds them that truth is not an enemy, it is the start of rebuilding. The courtroom remains steady as Judge Lauren Lake prepares to transition deeper into the legal core of the case. The first half of the hearing has already exposed the emotional structures that led the parties here. A marriage carrying unresolved wounds, an affair that was brief but consequential, and a child whose identity has become the central point of inquiry. Now, the court shifts into a more analytical mode. Judge Lake begins examining each participant's statements with legal precision, connecting their emotions to the broader framework of family law, evidence rules, and jurisprudence. As she proceeds, she begins to highlight how the parties' testimonies intersect with the legal system's expectations, especially in matters involving paternity. She uses her platform to educate the courtroom about how the law evaluates human behavior, not as isolated mistakes, but as part of a sequence of decisions that shape responsibilities, consequences, and rights. This is where the relationship between law and justice becomes more visible. The law requires structured evidence, but justice requires understanding the context behind that evidence. At this point, Judge Lake reviews the timeline of relationships again, probing deeper into the statements made earlier. She looks closely at Ms. Shomo's account of emotional loneliness within her marriage. The mother explains how she sought connection in a moment of weakness. While her explanation does not excuse her actions, it highlights a psychological pattern that often appears in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals describe how emotional fractures can push them toward harmful or regrettable choices. She openly acknowledges the consequences of her decisions and expresses remorse for the confusion her actions created. Judge Lake then examines Mr. Kleckler's perspective once more. His testimony reveals how unspoken doubt can cripple a marriage. He explains that for months he attempted to push aside his intuition, convincing himself that trusting his wife was more important than questioning her. This internal battle mirrors many cases discussed on legal analysis platforms such as the Divorce Course podcast, where attorneys explain how the fear of confronting painful truths often delays the moment of clarity. Silence, in such cases, becomes its own form of emotional evidence, shaping behavior and decision-making long before a court becomes involved. The judge then turns her analytical lens toward Mr. Freeman. His willingness to accept potential fatherhood without hesitation stands out. Judge Lake notes that this attitude is important because it helps establish his credibility. Cases involving potential biological fathers often involve avoidance or inconsistent positions. Here, however, Mr. Freeman presents himself as steady and willing. His testimony aligns with themes explored in Truth Changes Everything podcast, where individuals confront dramatic revelations that redefine their understanding of responsibility. He positions himself as someone ready to accept the truth, whether or not it aligns with his expectations. As Judge Lake evaluates these testimonies, she identifies that the case is not driven by denial, but by conflict between emotional memory and biological reality. This distinction is crucial because it shapes how she proceeds toward the legal considerations. She emphasizes that paternity cases carry more than emotional weight. They influence custody arrangements, financial obligations, and long-term family structures. She reminds the courtroom that a child's well-being must remain the primary priority, regardless of who the biological father is. The hearing then moves into a deeper review of the events surrounding the conception window. Judge Lake carefully reconstructs the timeframe mentioned earlier, clarifying the days during which the mother was intimate with both men. She does not sensationalize the details. Instead, she treats them with clinical neutrality, focusing on how overlapping timelines create reasonable doubt under the law. The facts presented so far demonstrate precisely why a DNA test is legally necessary. Without scientific confirmation, neither testimony nor assumption can determine the truth. The judge also addresses a key legal concept that surfaces in many paternity disputes: adverse inference under evidence acts. In cases where someone refuses to provide truthful information, or where details are intentionally withheld, courts can form negative presumptions. Judge Lake notes that in this case, none of the parties appear to be withholding evidence now. However, she acknowledges that earlier in the relationship, avoidance of truth, such as the mother withholding the possibility of another father, created emotional and legal distortion. By bringing this concept into the discussion, she reminds the courtroom that the justice system has tools to address dishonesty, but its preferred path is always factual clarity. She then revisits a particularly emotional part of the testimony: the mother's recollection of betrayal and its psychological impact. The judge does not minimize this pain. Instead, she explains how unresolved trauma often plays a major role in the decisions people later regret. She links this to patterns studied in family law psychology, where early relationship wounds contribute to unstable decision-making. These reflections are not emotional indulgence. They are part of constructing a full understanding of why the court is now tasked with restoring stability. From this point, Judge Lake turns toward the evolving dynamic between the adults. She observes that the couple's marriage appears deeply damaged, perhaps beyond repair. The husband openly admits that he and his wife feel like oil and water, echoing a metaphor that captures how incompatible their emotional states have become. Judge Lake explains that such dynamics often appear in cases where infidelity intersects with unresolved conflict. When couples attempt reconciliation without addressing deeper issues, they often return to the same arguments. This pattern, documented widely in professional discussions of marital breakdown, contributes to the emotional environment that ultimately brings cases like this into court. The judge then asks targeted questions regarding future intentions. She wants to understand how each party plans to act once the truth is known. The mother expresses her desire for stability for her son. She stresses that the child deserves clarity and a consistent father figure. Her voice demonstrates a mixture of relief and fear. She wants resolution, but she also worries about how the results may affect her family. The husband, meanwhile, expresses that he will not mistreat the child regardless of the outcome. His emotional conflict between loyalty and betrayal becomes evident. He explains that he has raised multiple children and considers himself committed to all of them. However, He also acknowledges that financial responsibility must align with biological truth. His position aligns with discussions in Supreme Court child support cases, where financial obligations must be based on accurate paternity. Mr. Freeman reiterates that he is prepared to assume an active parental role. His willingness to provide full custody, if necessary, demonstrates seriousness in his approach. Judge Lake acknowledges this, explaining that not all potential fathers express such commitment. His attitude adds another legal layer to the court's considerations. The law requires not only biological confirmation, but also evaluation of willingness and capacity to parent. As the judge continues processing the testimonies, she makes a point to remind the courtroom that this case is not about punishment. It is about truth. The courtroom itself becomes a neutral ground where emotional narratives must give way to factual certainty. She highlights how scientific evidence has revolutionized paternity cases. Before DNA technology, many children grew up under assumptions that were never challenged. Today, a simple test can restructure families, identities, and futures. While this can bring emotional turmoil, it ensures that the truth supports long-term justice. Judge Lake then shifts the discussion to the child's emotional future. She emphasizes that regardless of the outcome, the adults must cooperate for the child's well-being. She addresses the possibility of co-parenting and encourages the father, whichever man it may be, to remain committed. She outlines how courts consider emotional bonds, financial stability, and parental consistency when establishing custody. These reflections demonstrate the broader legal ecosystem that surrounds a simple question of biology. She reminds them that the results may determine not only who the father is, but how the child's life will be shaped moving forward. At this point in the hearing, the judge begins preparing the court for the DNA results. She asks each party to express their final thoughts before the envelope is opened. The mother conveys a mix of guilt and hope. She wants closure, not for herself but for her child. Her emotional honesty, though painful, reinforces her commitment to embracing whatever truth emerges. The husband expresses a quiet sadness. He acknowledges that learning the truth may hurt him, but he prefers reality to living in doubt. His statement reflects a broader human truth. People regret taking a DNA test only when they fear what the results may confirm, yet they regret not knowing even more. Mr. Freeman remains calm, expressing readiness to accept responsibility if the child is his. Judge Lake listens to each statement carefully. She does not rush them. Instead, she allows their emotions to settle into the record as part of the broader narrative of the case. The courtroom grows still. The judge holds the envelope containing the DNA results. She explains that this document will provide the clarity all three adults have been seeking. She emphasizes again that truth does not destroy families. It reveals the structure they need in order to be rebuilt. The principles of jurisprudence call for honesty. The concept of justice calls for responsibility. The envelope remains unopened for just a moment longer as the judge reflects on the importance of truth in this case. The tension in the courtroom increases, not because of dramatic performance, but because of the weight that the truth carries. With the courtroom silent and every pair of eyes fixed on Judge Lauren Lake, the case enters its final and most decisive stage. All the emotional testimonies, all the explanations of past decisions, and all the reflections on broken trust have led to this single moment. The judge lifts the envelope containing the DNA results, the one document capable of dissolving months of uncertainty. The air feels suspended between fear and relief, because everyone knows that the truth, once read, cannot be undone. Judge Lake opens the envelope slowly, not for drama, but with the seriousness that the moment demands. She explains once again that the results are provided by an accredited laboratory and constitute the most scientifically reliable form of evidence available in paternity law. Before reading the findings, she reminds the courtroom that the purpose of this proceeding is not to assign blame, but to establish factual clarity. This is a principle deeply grounded in the relationship between law and justice. The law seeks accuracy, and justice seeks resolution. She turns her attention first to the husband, Mr. Kleckler, preparing him emotionally for whatever the truth may reveal. His face reflects a mix of resolve and resignation. He has openly acknowledged that he will accept the result, whatever it may be. His internal struggle is evident. He hopes the child is his, but part of him also wants clarity even if that clarity hurts. This conflicted position mirrors many real-life cases discussed on the Divorce Course podcast, where spouses confront truths that redefine the structure of their families. Judge Lake then prepares the mother, Ms. Shomo, for what comes next. She has already expressed guilt, hopes, and fear, and now she braces herself for the confirmation of one man or the other. Her body language demonstrates the emotional weight she carries, not just from her decisions, but from their effects on her child. Her remorse aligns with the kinds of moments often described in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals face consequences while hopping for new beginnings. Finally, the judge looks toward Mr. Freeman. He sits in quiet anticipation, ready for the truth, ready to accept responsibility if the child is his. His calmness reflects confidence not in a particular outcome, but in his willingness to act once the truth is clear. This contrasts with many DNA test cheating stories, where potential fathers show avoidance or denial. Here, the potential father embraces accountability even before the result is known. Then the judge reads the result. Inside the courtroom, the truth is delivered in a single sentence. Mr. Freeman is the biological father. The legal uncertainty dissolves instantly. The months of emotional conflict, hidden doubts, and strained relationships converge into a moment of irreversible clarity. Scientifically, the matter is settled. Legally, the paternity question is resolved. Emotionally, the consequences begin. Judge Lake pauses, allowing the result to settle into each person's awareness. The mother takes a breath that sounds like release. Relief spreads across her expression, not because the truth is easy, but because it is finally known. She has feared the impact but has longed for clarity for her child. Her immediate reaction is gratitude. She now knows the identity of the man who will share the responsibility of raising her son. She speaks softly, expressing that her son deserves a father and deserves the chance to grow with honesty instead of uncertainty. Mr. Freeman responds internally with a sense of acceptance. He maintains the same steady posture he displayed throughout the hearing. The confirmation of paternity transforms him from a possible father into a legal one. In this moment, he shifts mentally from being a potential caretaker to being responsible for shaping a child's life. These scenes, although described without cinematic dramatization, mirror the emotional arcs often found in adoption stories' full episodes, where identity and future merge into newly defined relationships. For Mr. Kleckler, the result lands with heaviness. The sadness he anticipated becomes real. Though he prepared himself intellectually, hearing the truth aloud forces him to confront emotional loss. He has been deeply involved in the child's early life and now must reposition himself in a way that respects biological reality while managing emotional attachment. His sense of grief is not dramatic. It is quiet, dignified, and rooted in a desire to protect the child. He expresses that he is grateful simply to know the truth. This sentiment reflects a powerful principle often emphasized in legal analysis. The truth settles confusion but not always pain. Judge Lauren Lake recognizes his emotional state and acknowledges his feelings. In her courtroom, emotional transparency is not dismissed. It is contextualized within the framework of law. She praises him for his honesty and commitment to supporting the child regardless of the outcome. She also reminds him that his bond with his daughters remains unaffected. This reassurance reflects a broader legal principle that biological truth does not erase emotional history. Once the immediate emotional reactions settle, Judge Lake moves into the practical and legal implications of the result. She explains that paternity confirmation carries long-term responsibilities. The biological father must engage in financial support, emotional presence, and decision-making on behalf of the child. These responsibilities align with established standards in child support regulations, including those discussed in Supreme Court child support cases. Although this courtroom does not impose immediate child support decisions, the confirmation of paternity activates the legal pathway toward those considerations. She urges the adults to communicate respectfully moving forward. The child's well-being is the legal priority, and co-parenting must be structured around stability, not conflict. Judge Lake emphasizes that the child deserves a peaceful environment shaped by adults who act in maturity rather than past resentment. Her guidance reflects broader jurisprudential principles that prioritize the concept of justice in jurisprudence not as punishment, but as fairness and protection of those who cannot protect themselves. At this stage, the courtroom transitions away from raw emotional testimony and toward thoughtful reflection. Judge Lake summarizes the case in a way that integrates its legal and human dimensions. She explains that this paternity action stands as an example of how truth, even when painful, ultimately illuminates the path toward healthier futures. She highlights that DNA testing is not merely a scientific tool. It is a mechanism of accountability. In many cases, people fear the results because they fear the upheaval that follows. Yet in the long term, clarity is often the only pathway to stability. The mother listens intently, absorbing every word. She expresses relief because her son will now have the chance to know his real father from an early age. Her emotional shift from fear to acceptance captures the psychological dimension of paternity cases. Uncertainty often creates greater anxiety than painful truth. Mr. Freeman commits himself to his new responsibility. His statements indicate that he intends to be present, both emotionally and practically, in the child's life. Judge Lake acknowledges his readiness, reminding him that fatherhood requires consistency, patience, and commitment. She outlines that future arrangements such as custody schedules, decision-making authority, and financial obligations will depend on cooperation between him and the mother. This explanation mirrors discussions frequently heard in legal education platforms like the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where attorneys explain how establishing paternity often marks the beginning, not the end, of a legal journey. For Mr. Kleckler, this moment becomes a reflective transition. Though no longer the child's legal father, he retains the emotional memories and the role he has played since the child's birth. Judge Lake commends him for his loyalty and empathy. She encourages him to continue being a positive presence for his daughters and acknowledges that emotional bonds, once formed, do not vanish. His sadness remains visible, but he accepts the court's findings with respect and dignity. With the main paternity portion complete, the courtroom shifts to a second, related matter described in the same file. The separate case involving a deceased father, 2 young girls, and the question of whether they are biologically related to the older daughter, Kari Garcia. This portion carries a different emotional tone, less conflict between adults and more concern about preserving family identity after loss. Once again, Judge Lauren Lake centers the discussion around factual clarity. Kari Garcia explains how she seeks the truth not for financial gain, but to honor her father's identity and protect his estate. Her emotional testimony reflects loyalty to her father's memory. She recounts how doubts lingered because of rumors surrounding the mother's relationships. These doubts created an unresolved chapter in her father's story, one she feels responsible for closing. Judge Lake acknowledges the sensitivity of questioning paternity after death, emphasizing that handling such matters requires compassion as well as legal accuracy. The mother of the two girls, Miss Huffman, expresses her belief that both children were fathered by Kari's deceased father. Her emotions surface as she explains how she wants her daughters to know their extended family and to grow with connection rather than isolation. Her testimony is marked by vulnerability, especially as she addresses misconceptions about her past. The court listens carefully, recognizing the complexity of pursuing truth when past actions and memories conflict. Judge Lake also considers the testimony of a court employee who clarifies that the mother had previously tested another man in relation to one of the children. Although the test concluded he was not the father, this detail introduces legal nuance. It raises questions about whether earlier uncertainty influenced the current conflict. The judge emphasizes the importance of full disclosure, explaining how half-truths often lead to deeper doubt. She addresses the principle of adverse inference, reminding the parties that withholding information, even unintentionally, can affect how courts interpret credibility. The judge then turns to the DNA comparison between the older daughter and Kari Garcia. In paternity investigations involving deceased individuals, testing the living relatives becomes necessary. The court acknowledges the scientific method that allows determination of genetic relationships through indirect comparison. This reflects the advancements in legal evidence, where truth becomes accessible even when direct samples are unavailable. When the results show a 99.9% biological relationship, the courtroom experiences a shift toward relief. Kari Garcia identifies the moment as emotionally significant. She sees in the children a reflection of her father, a connection she feared might not exist. Her expression captures a sense of completion. After years of uncertainty, she now knows that the girls are indeed her sisters. Judge Lake emphasizes the importance of this truth, not only for legal purposes, but for the preservation of family identity. The second child's test results confirm the same level of relatedness. This reinforces the legal and biological conclusion. Both girls share the same paternal link. The emotional weight of this truth is profound. The mother expresses deep relief, and Kari expresses gratitude. The children now have access to a broader family, and Kari has the assurance that her father's memory remains intact. Judge Lake acknowledges the beauty of this outcome, noting that truth, while often painful, can also bring unity. With both cases resolved, Judge Lake reiterates the foundational principles that guided the proceedings. She explains that paternity courts exist not to shame or punish, but to establish factual clarity, support family structures, and protect children. She emphasizes that the adults in both cases must now act with responsibility, uphold commitments, and create stable environments for their children. She reminds them that justice is not achieved through conflict. It is achieved through truth, cooperation, and accountability. As the hearing concludes, the courtroom regains its quiet normalcy. The emotional intensity fades, replaced by a sense of resolution. The truth has been spoken, recorded, and legally recognized. The adults now leave the courtroom carrying not uncertainty, but clarity. Their futures may still involve challenges, but the foundation is no longer built on doubt. In both cases, Judge Lauren Lake has guided them through a legal process that honored the principles of jurisprudence and protected the dignity of every child involved.